Hey everyone, UristMcSparks back with you again, and it is time to finish up Roblox racing. It's been a long journey, we've come a long way since we started, but I think we've got a really cool game. The last thing I'd like to add to this is a lobby. It's a pretty common feature in a lot of Roblox games, and I think it'll serve our game well. Plus, if you're making a game in the future, you can use this same lobby system in that one too. So, I'm going to start off by putting my lobby into my game, and I'm just going to build a little box for it to be in. You can build your lobby however you want, but I'm just making a very simple little lobby where the players can watch the action of the race. So I'm just going to make a big glass box right in the middle. Good rule of thumb for lobbies is that chances are players can be in them for a while, so you want to make sure that they've got something to do. And in a racing game, what better way to give them some entertainment than to let them watch the race? There are lots of different techniques. Some people like to have little like soccer balls or something you can kick around the lobby, maybe some art for them to look at. You just want to make sure that players are entertained, because chances are if they're joining a game, they may join a game in progress. And if they're there and they have to wait like 2 or 3 minutes before a game starts, depending on how long the race is, they could be bored and just leave. So we don't want that. We want to make sure that they have incentive to stay and that they can enjoy your game to the fullest. And it looks like I didn't quite drag this out to where I want it to. Again, this doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just trying to make essentially just a little cage for the players to be in so they can't get out and disturb the racers. And let's see, is that just... okay, it's not on the ground yet. There we go. And just going to scale that one back. Again, I'm just using the basic scale tools. I'm just making these slightly transparent and glass-like. Just making a big box. Later I might make some kind of roof or something. Maybe make sure they can't get out the ceiling. But for now, I think this looks fine. I'm just going to select all of these walls and make sure that they are anchored. And there we go. Cool. So now one thing you'll want to make sure that players start inside the lobby is what's called a spawn location. You click on Insert, click on Spawn Location. It'll add this to your game. It looks like a normal block, but it actually does something really neat. So spawn location does is that if you have one in your game, as soon as a player joins the game, or perhaps their character dies, like they fall into lava or something, the player will respawn at a spawn location. So in this case, we just want to make sure the spawn location is in our lobby and put it smack dab in the middle. I'm going to anchor it in place. So now we have that. We also want to make sure that the players get to our track somehow, though, when the game starts. Well, for that, I'm going to insert a new part. I'm just going to put it right next to the track. I'm going to make sure that it's anchored. Make sure the collisions are off, just so it doesn't get in the way of anything. Maybe make the surface smooth. And this will just serve as a reference point for where we want the players to teleport to. Okay. One last thing before we actually do any kind of scripting with these. I'm just going to give them good names. So this is the spawn location that's in the lobby. I'm going to call this lobby spawn. And now this part out on the track, note that this is just a normal part. It's not a spawn location. If it was a spawn location, there would be a chance that players would spawn here when they join the game, which isn't good. They need to start in the lobby. This is just a part, normal part. And I'm just going to rename it track spawn. Again, not really spawn location, but we can name things whatever we like. And I think track spawn kind of gives it a good indication of what this thing does. So now we'll go back into our script. And like we've been doing, I'm going to add a variable for each one. So I'm going to have a local lobby spawn. This game.workspace.lobby spawn. And I'm going to have something called a variable called track spawn. This game.workspace.track spawn. Very nice. It's So now we can reference these using variables. So let's go back to our game plan, what we want to have happen. So we've already got our game looping. We solved that last lesson. Everything resets to the beginning and everything's good like that. And the game starts up, waits for the race to end, then sets everything back up to start afresh. So where do we want to add the players in on this? Well, after everything's been set up, we'll want to make sure that we teleport all the available players from the lobby to the game. And once the game is finished, we'll teleport everyone who's in the game back to the lobby. Sounds pretty simple. So let's go into our script. Again, we've added those two variables. So at the end of all the functions we've been making, let's add a new one. I'm going to call my function teleport players. And if you recall from the last lesson, we learned about adding a parameter to a function. So we can give it a little bit of extra information so we don't have to make multiple functions. Because we could make a function teleport players to the lobby, teleport players to the racetrack, but they're going to do pretty similar things. Why not just, combine them into one? So I'm going to name my variable target. So I can say where I want the players to teleport to. So how do we go about teleporting players? Well, it's something we're going to want to do to every player. So we're going to need to use a for loop. And this is pretty much no different from any for loop we've written before. Except this time, instead of calling the variable object, I'm going to call it player. My players are people, not objects. And I think I'd like to call them like that. And instead of game.workspace or game.serverStorage, we're going to just cycle through game.players and get all of its children. Because that's another one of these folder type things in here called players. Whenever a player joins the game, they get added in here. It's a really nice convenient place to go through a player list. Now the one trick is that the model of the character, this thing that's in the workspace, is different from the player that's listed in players. They're actually two separate things. Later on you can learn the difference, but for now, just understand that they're different things. The player list just lists the players. You can do some special stuff with that. But the model will also have the workspace will also have a model for each player. And this model is called the character. So we need to get the character for each player. I'm going to store this in a variable called character equals player.character. That's simply how you get the character of a player. And note, I'm defining a variable here inside my for loop. Normally, if you're going to be using a variable a lot, you want to define it somewhere in your code. I like putting them all at the top of my script. But if you're inside like a function or inside a for loop, and you only intend to use the variable there, you can just make up the variable right then and there. So now we have the model for the character. That's this thing in this case. We want to move it somewhere. We want to teleport it. So how should we do that? Well, first of all, the model itself doesn't really have any kind of position. It's just a collection of stuff. You can see these are all the things that are inside my character. So we're going to have to move something that does actually exist, one thing that's actually a part. One useful thing is the torso, just the main body of the character. So we'll need that too. We'll just say local torso is character.torso. Now we need to move that torso somewhere. Well, the way we're going to do this is we're going to use what's called its C-frame. You might have heard this around Roblox before, but essentially, the long story short about C-frames is that a C-frame is just where a part is and what way it's pointing. And it's a way you can move parts around. And so, what you can do is, let's say we want to move the torso of our character somewhere else. I'm going to say torso.cFrame equals, and I'm just going to say that's equal to the C-frame of the part that we're teleporting it to. So it's just going to be target.cFrame. So what'll happen? Let's say we're teleporting players to, let's see, where is it? Our track spawn, right over here. What'll happen is it'll get the player, it'll get his character and then his torso, and it's going to say, okay, torso, your C-frame, basically where you are in the world, I want that to actually be the same as the C-frame of the target. In this case, the target is going to be the track spawn. And what that'll do is that'll shoot our player all the way over here instantly. And a nice thing is that if you teleport the torso of a player using this method, using its C-frame, all the other parts of the player will follow suit and they'll all be teleported as one unit. Pretty neat. Yes, I do want to save my changes to my script. One thing I do want to do though is that notice how this part is in the ground. If we move the torso over here, the character will be half buried. Its legs will be stuck in the ground. So I just want to make sure that this part is suspended a little bit, just to be safe. And it's anchored, and I've turned collisions off, so it won't interfere with the character. The character will just pop over here, fall down, no problem. And I'll do the same for our other target, the lobby spawn. And that's anchored, again, collisions are off. So when they teleport back to the lobby, they'll just fall down harmlessly. And there we go. So let's add this into our game loop. So we said that we want to add it maybe after we reset all this data, but before we start the race, before maybe this pause here too. So I'm going to add a note. I'm going to say teleport all players to the racetrack. And we're just going to use our function teleport players, and our variable name was track spawn. And all will happen here is we'll call teleport players, and we're saying track spawn is our parameter. And here, target will be track spawn. And so we'll go through all the players in the game, get their character, get their torso, and say that the torso C-frame is equal to the targets, which in this case is going to be the track spawn. And at the end of the game, after the game is finished, we're going to teleport all the players back to the lobby. So, teleport all players to the lobby. And to do this, we just say teleport players lobby spawn. Cool. Let's try this out, see if it's working. I hit play solo. So we're out here on the track, waiting for things to get going. Just kind of chilling. It's pretty cool. Checking out our lobby. Oh, I got teleported to the track. And, oh, there goes the lights. And we're off. So let's just drive around the track. And then once we finish the game, we'll know that, ooh. Ah, we exploded. How novel. Well, what was happening there? Well, when we crossed the finish line, we were still in our car, and it said to teleport all the players back to the lobby. Well, the thing is that when you're attached to a car in Roblox, you're physically attached to it. You're actually welded to that piece. And so you and the car are kind of this one unit. And that can be a little bit messy when you're teleporting with C-frames. So how can we fix this? Well, one thing that would help is if the players all jumped out of the car at the end, then we won't have to worry because they're no longer be attached to the car. But we can't guarantee that. So one thing we could do is, right before we teleport all the players, we could just delete all the cars. Therefore, the car would be gone, but the player would still be around, but they wouldn't be attached to anything and they could teleport freely. So let's actually move our destroy cars function right down to here. And that should still work, because let's think about how our game loop works. The very first time the game would run, there aren't any cars anyway, so creating cars is okay. Then after the race is finished, we'll get rid of all the cars. And when the race starts up again, there aren't any cars, we'll create them. Pretty much the same thing as our loop was doing before, except now we're just destroying the cars before we teleport, just so that we don't blow anybody up. Neat. Let's make sure that works real quick. Again, you want to make sure we're testing. Testing, testing, testing. Jumping, jumping, jumping. There we go. Then we hop into our car. Wait for the race to start. Red, yellow, green. And we're going. We're driving. Ooh, I wonder if I can do this without actually hitting a wall. Nope. Oh, and we got teleported back to the lobby. I do want maybe a second to revel in my victory. So before we destroy the cars and teleport players back, maybe I'm just going to add like 2 seconds for me to feel really good about winning and driving around. That way it's not so instantaneous, because that's a little bit jarring. But in terms of the basic functionality, it looks like that was working just fine. Now there is one thing I would like for you to add to your teleport players function, just as a little bit of a safeguard. Right now everything's working fine because we're working in a very clean and sterile environment. But when you have the game on Roblox, some funky things can happen. Most notably, I'm concerned about if a player joins a race as players are being teleported. Because it actually takes a little bit of time for a player's model to be loaded into Roblox. And so there's a chance that if they join right as everyone's being teleported, the player may not have a character or a torso to teleport. And we want to make sure that we're giving that player enough time to join the game and join the race right before it starts. Because it'll only take like a second or two. So it's not going to be too big a wait for everyone else. So let's make sure we're not having any problems with players joining the game in progress. One thing we want to do is we want to make sure that the torso exists. Well, we have a nice function for that. Remember how way back when we used this function called findFirstChild? We can give it a part name. Well, we can do something very similar here. Instead of character.torso, we can say character : wait for child torso. And what that will do is that'll just delay the game until the character has a child named Torso. All there is to it. So when the game is running, as I said, this model may take a little bit of time to load in, and maybe this Torso child, and the Torso, come back here. Torso is the child of player 1 here. Torso may not have loaded yet. Wait for child, we'll just add a little bit of delay, and it'll pause this script until the torso is loaded, and then it can continue on to changing its C-frame. Very nice. That's a very nice clean check. Now we also want to do the same thing for the character, because the character is this whole model, and the model may not exist. So how can we do that? Well, unfortunately, the character is not a child of the player. Because remember, the player is out here in the list of players, but the model is a child of the workspace. So it's not actually related to the player in this list of players. So unfortunately, we can't wait for child because it's not a child. Well, we can do something very, very similar. Just like we did down here in our wait loop waiting for the race to end, we can just say while player.character equals nil do wait. And all that will do, nil is just a special word for something that doesn't exist. So we're saying while the player character doesn't exist, while it's equal to nil, just wait. And again, if we just have a wait with no seconds defined. It's just the briefest of pauses before it tries again. Because again, we're in a while loop. We want to make sure the game doesn't crash. So the script, when it comes to here, it'll say, hey, is the player character the same as nil? Does the player character exist? No? Well, if the player character is nil, then we just want to wait a second. And then check again. Is the player character nil? If it is, wait a second. Or wait a moment, rather. If the character is not nil, like if the character exists, if that model's there, then I'll just proceed to go down to here. And then to here, and so on and so forth. Again, this is a very rare edge case. It might not even happen in your game, but if it did happen, it could make this script error, and I want to make sure that your game runs smoothly if you're using this code. So this is just a clean way of making sure that teleports work, just in case. You can never be too careful when it comes to code. So that's looking good. I'm going to hit reset. Oh yes, I made script changes. Definitely want to keep those changes. Those are good changes. Before I think we can call this good, I do intend for this to be a multiplayer game, so I just want to make sure that nothing funky happens when we have several players. So a good way to test this is click on the test tab. Make sure I have 2 players selected here under this clients and servers section, and click start. And what that will do is going to open up 3 more windows of Studio, because this is a more true simulation of Roblox, much more simulating than Play Solo. One of these windows of Studio is going to be the server, like the Roblox machine, and there will be 2 windows for the player, or rather for both players. So you notice here we have player 1. We also have player 2 over here. In the background, we actually have the server. You can actually even see player 1 and player 2 just hanging in the game world. But I'm noticing something interesting. Player 1 is in the game. Player 1's on the track. Player 1 got teleported, but player 2 didn't. What is going on there? I want all my players to, or at least more than one. Let's take a look at our code. So when the game starts, it's gonna, reset everything, and it's gonna teleport all the players. Well, let's say, in this case, I think player 1 loaded before player 2, and this teleport function got called only when player 1 existed. And so it went through all the players. There was only one player there. It said, okay, I'm going to teleport you to the game. And then player 2 joined afterwards and wasn't teleported. Well, I don't think it'll be much fun to just drive on my own. So I want to make sure that at least 2 people are in the game before I start running it. To do that, we're just going to add a little bit more to our code, something very simple. I'm going to add a new variable called local minimum players. I'm going to say that's equal to 2. We can do that. We can say a variable is equal to any number we want. In this case, I just want to make sure this number is 2. That's going to represent the fewest number of players the game can start a game with. If there's only 1 player, it's going to wait till someone else joins. That way you're always guaranteeing there's a race with at least 2 people. I think that's fair. You can always do, didn't mean to cut you out. You can always do more if you feel like your game needs that. Some games certainly do. What we're going to do here, right at the beginning of our game loop, we're just going to wait for enough players before we start the game. And again, that's just in a comment. This is just me keeping track of where I am. And I'm just going to do a simple while loop. I'm going to say while minimum players, while game.players.numplayers. This is a special way to get the current number of players in a game. While that number is, let's say, less than the minimum number of players, then wait, end. Oh, sorry, not then. Do. Oh, and wait has 2 parentheses. There we go. I have to make sure I'm typing this all out correctly. So what's happening here? Well, this is a normal while loop. Same type of loop we've been using for some time. Got the while race in progress. We've even got the while true do for our main game loop. This one's just checking, is the number of players in the game less than the minimum number of players? Remember, we just set the minimum number of players to 2. So what will happen when the game starts if only 1 player is there? Game.players.unplayers will be 1. Minimum players is 2. 1 is less than 2. So it'll wait. And then it'll try it again. And it'll just keep repeating that. Now let's say if 2 players were in the game. Game.numplayers would be 2. Minimum players would be 2. 2 is not less than 2. 2 is actually equal to 2. Therefore, it's not going to go into the loop. And it will start the race. Easy as pie. So this time, when we do test and start with 2 players, both players should get teleported to the track because the game can't start until there are 2 players. So it'll take a little bit of time to start this up. Again, testing in this method takes a little bit longer than play solo. So for the most part, I recommend using play solo for most of your testing purposes. But at some point, you do want to test with this kind of longer method, just so that you can see that it works well with multiple players, if that's what your game requires. And there we go, we got both people on the track. And we can have them race against each other. Unfortunately, you can only control 1 person at a time. You have to switch between the screens. No, catch up. And let's just, oh, you're hopeless. Let's just finish the race with this person. Let's make sure that everyone's teleported back to the lobby. Everything resets, and they're both teleported back to the track. Player 1 is the winner. Cars were destroyed. And, it looks like we weren't teleported back. Interesting. Well, it looks like something was wrong there. Close this up. Well, let's take a look at our script. So the players weren't getting teleported. And that was right after we destroyed the cars. If we look up at destroy cars, we can see we're using object.destroy, right? Same as always. Well, the trick with destroy is that it doesn't destroy right away. There can actually be a little bit of time for everything to catch up to know that the object has actually been removed from the game. It's not instantaneous. Sometimes there's a little bit of time that takes to have that happen. So we can't assume that the cars were all destroyed right away. So we just need to add a little bit of a pause right after we destroy the cars and before we teleport the players. So I'm just going to wait maybe like another 2 seconds. That should give the game enough time to make sure all the cars have been cleaned up. Because remember, the issue with teleporting players was that if the player was still attached to a car, weird things could happen. And if we try to destroy all the cars and then immediately teleport players, the cars might not have been completely destroyed as soon as we tried to teleport them. So weird things might have been happening then too. So just to give ourselves a nice bit of breathing room, just gonna add another little pause in there. And don't be afraid to do that every once in a while in your game. You know, things don't have to happen instantaneously all the time. Sometimes it's okay to let the game have a nice little rhythm. So let's just test it out one more time. Again, using the start server button up here. It's being fired up. So I'm just going to finish up the race with this fellow. I'll make sure the other, let's make sure the other guy's in a car. Gotta go to the other player here. There we go. Let's make sure you're in a car. So we want to teleport, test the teleporting. And let's take you through the track. Okay, maybe not you. Again, you'd think I've gotten better at this by now. But nope, I'm still not a very good driver. But hopefully, other people will be able to drive my game much better than I will. So here we are, almost across the finish line. Boom, there we go. Pair 1 is 1. We're out of our cars, and we're teleported back. Aw, neat, awesome. And one more time for good measure, I'm just going to test again after we teleport back, just again to make sure everything's okay. If it worked once, that's great. If it works twice, then that's even better. So off we go, off to the races. And yeah, this is basically game development in a nutshell. You're testing constantly. You're always trying to make sure that things are working as expected. And player 2 won this time. You know, cars are gone, and we're back in the lobby. Fantastic. Just going to close this up here. Oh, and close the server one as well. And there we go. We've got a complete game here. Naturally, you want to make sure your course is different from this and your lobby is nicer. Maybe we want to make sure that the checkpoints are all completely transparent so the player can't see them at all. There we go. We know they're there. We can always make them visible again if we need to. But just to make sure the racetrack looks nice and clean, make those invisible. So I hope you've enjoyed this lesson series. Hope you've gotten some useful information out of it. I definitely encourage you to keep expanding on this game or make new games of your own. There's a lot of great resources out there if you need help. The wiki is one of a really great place to go for lessons, tutorials. There's also forums on our website if you're running into trouble or need some inspiration. And there's also a really great lesson series that's been running in parallel to this, where Stickmaster Luke has been making the Mad Blockster. I highly encourage you to go take a look at that video. It uses a lot more scripting than we do and assumes you know a lot more about it. So keep that in mind. It's a little bit more advanced, but it's something to work up to, and I think you could really enjoy it. In the meantime, I'm going to publish this game to Roblox as Roblox Racing. And I'm going to make sure that it isn't copy locked because I want to make sure, let's see, where is that? Well, I will make sure that it isn't copy locked so that, oh, here it goes. There we go, not copy locked. That way, you know, when you're making your game, if you're running into any trouble or if you don't know exactly how I did something, you can always go there to check. I definitely recommend you try it out yourself, just using these videos, you know, writing the scripts yourself, setting up the game yourself, and then checking later if you have any problems. But I hope you've enjoyed. This has been UristMcSparks with Roblox, and as always, you make the game.